The Entrepreneur's Library, episode 84.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Library,
the only book-centric podcast that reviews all the top-selling business books and shares authors' perspective firsthand. This is your resource to finding the next great book
that will enable you to grow personally and professionally.
Welcome your host, Wade Danielson.
Welcome back to the Entrepreneur's Library. Today we have Marcia Reynolds, author of The Discomfort Zone, How Leaders Turn Difficult Conversations into Breakthroughs. Welcome, Marcia, and thank you for joining us on the Entrepreneur's Library.
Thank you.
Will you take just a moment to introduce yourself and tell us just a little bit about you personally?
Sure. Well, I have been teaching leadership for over 30 years. I like to quit counting. But it's always fascinating because the more we learn about human behavior, then the more there is to consider in being a leader, that it's not just clearly telling people what they need to do. And people change all the time. So actually, even though I've been teaching the same thing for years, it changes every year. So I'm always excited about it. I worked for years with companies, but my family was always a family of entrepreneurs, so I went out to start my own business about 17 years ago. So I'm an entrepreneur as well.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Now let's jump right into your book, The Discomfort Zone, which was just made available for purchase back October 13th of 2014. And Marcia, we're going to move quickly, but we're going to cover the top questions that a reader wants to get answered that's also listening. And the first one is, what was the inspiration behind writing The Discomfort Zone?
Well, I think the most misunderstood area of leadership is the whole topic of listening. You know, leaders know that they have to listen, but they confuse it with just being patient while somebody's talking until it's their turn to talk. And so I really feel that there's a stronger purpose for listening than most leaders realize, that in order to change people's minds, they have to listen for specific things. So it's not just how to listen, but the purpose. And so I really wanted to put this down on paper to help all leaders to understand what it takes to change people's behaviors really, and how it is that they can do it.
Excellent. So you started to cover this next question a little bit. And when you first started talking, that's what makes your book different from others regarding this similar topic?
Well, there's two things. One, it's the discomfort zone is how leaders turn difficult conversations into breakthroughs. And so it's a different conversation book. There's a lot of conversation books out there, but they really focus on what is it the leader should say. And a lot of training focuses on what the leader should say instead of what should the leader listen for. And so this differs, that it's really about helping the person achieve their goals instead of the leader achieve his or her goals, or they both achieve goals. And then the other thing is it is a leadership coaching book, but most coaching books are very kind of linear in problem solving, and this goes to a much deeper level of what coaching really is and how to really use it as a leader.
So based on how you actually wrote this book, how would you suggest the reader engage with your book? Is this one that they can read from, front to back all the way through, or is this one that they can jump in and cherry pick different information and jump back out?
Well, each chapter does have very specific things that they can do. So if they were to jump to a specific chapter, they would get value out of it. But taking it all together, it allows it to be kind of cohesive. There's 2 chapters of just case studies, just examples and different situations, so the leaders can really see it in action, how to use the skills. So they probably want to read a little bit about the skills before they actually see it in action.
Excellent. So, Marcia, now that we know, one, a little bit about you, and then we know a little bit about the inspiration and the differentiators, with the book. Now, this is my favorite part, where I want to hand over the mic for the next 5 or 10 minutes and really just allow you to take us through your book. A lot of people, again, we've talked about beforehand, but these are busy entrepreneurs who are looking for their next great book that's going to help them personally or professionally. And so, will you take us through your book?
Sure. Actually, the introduction does describe what is the discomfort zone and why it's so important that not just leaders, but if you're a parent or even a friend, to truly understand what's necessary to create behavioral change. So if you want someone to change, you can't just ask them to do it. It doesn't really work, as we all know. But what does work? So first I go into what needs to occur in the brain to make that breakthrough, that the person then recognizes what they need to do for themselves. So that's described in the introduction. And then we move into chapter 1, where it does describe what I was talking about, the difference between most conversation and coaching techniques and why this is important. But it also looks at some of the common, I want to say almost excuses that leaders give for not engaging in these types of conversations. Just they always think they're going to take time, or there's going to be a little discomfort in them because there might be some emotions. And I talk about how this is still important for them to engage in these conversations and why, if they want to achieve their results. So instead of constantly hitting those roadblocks of people won't change or they don't listen and they don't do what's best for them, this is how to overcome these roadblocks. Then in chapter 2, I started to get into the guidelines. First, we explore how to establish trust and what is the intention for the conversation in order to make it successful. So there's some things that you need to consider as a leader before you go in. What's the emotional tone you want to set? You need to carry that emotion with you. You can't be angry at people and have these conversations or disappointed by them. You need to have the intention that they're going to achieve their goals, not just yours, but you're really there to help them succeed and to be even, bigger and better than they are right now. So these are the conditions for the conversations. In the next chapter, chapter 3, we look at the model, and I give a very specific model for having these conversations. So even though it's not a linear process, it's more of an intuitive flow, it starts very intentional and ends very intentional, and then gives the 3 major steps in the middle, the reflection, exploration, and acknowledgement. How do you use that to create the breakthrough? In chapter 4, then, we go into really deeper listening, and how do you listen with your entire nervous system, which we label as intuition. But how do you actually do that? A lot of people talk about it, but they don't actually say how they can do it, and so it's kind of elusive. But this chapter describes very clearly how you can actually access the major processing centers in your nervous system, which includes your gut and your heart, as well as your head, to actually make decisions as well as to listen to people. So you can trust your gut, which you need to do, and sometimes we need to listen to our heart. So how do you actually do that? That's described in chapter 4. Then chapter 5 and 6 are these case studies that I mentioned, where it really looks at how do you implement these skills. So chapter 5 looks at how to break through people's defense routines, the things that keep them from changing. How do you break through that? And then chapter 6 explores cases where they have blocks of moving forward, even though they know that the transitions are good for them. How do you help them to move forward through the blocks, whether they're fears or beliefs or whatever is holding them back? Then finally in chapter 7, I know that you can read the book, but there has to be a disciplined implementation in order to make these skills just natural for you. So I give you a plan of how do you actually maintain your practice over time. And I look at 2 things, both how can you implement this into your own organization, regardless of how big your company is. And then also, how do you create your own personal development plan to make sure that your own changes stick? So it goes through all the steps, as well as what do you need in order to move forward. And so everything's there in the book to help you actually implement the techniques.
Excellent, Marcia. You did an amazing job of taking us through there and giving us a bird's eye view. And now I'm going to be somewhat mean, and I'm going to try and take us even further and ask that if the reader could only take away one concept, principle, or action item, a gold nugget out of everything that you just discussed, everything in your book, what would you want that to be?
I know this sounds difficult, but the big thing is that they have to turn off their thinking brain. Because we rely on our thinking brain, and we think that we need that in order to do things and to think through problems and resolve situations. But it's that thinking, censoring, self-monitoring brain that often gets in the way. And I know this from studying athletes, professional athletes, and working with sports psychologists, that the best players know how to turn off their brain and be able to, go with the flow. And these conversations have to be spontaneous. Otherwise, you're going to, be criticizing people and thinking ahead. So the book teaches a lot about not just how to be present, but how to be present with people. So I think that's a big concept in the book.
That's a huge concept. I need this book bad, because I have that what you just said, being able to turn it off. Is sometimes even a problem. If you're someone who likes to innovate or a problem solve, not everyone wants you to do that with them.
Yeah.
Especially when I come home and I'm in the mode of business, and my wife tells me something, and I'm automatically, the brain starts working on how can I
exactly.
I am listening and I'm hearing, but I'm trying to then how could I help her fix her day? And of course, everyone would like help on how to fix their day, right?
Right. And what does she really want from you?
Yeah, just to listen,
Just to listen.
Yeah.
I know.
Shut down the brain. So it's
well, and honestly, the best thing you can do for people is to help them discover solutions on their own. Because once they discover on their own, then they will actually commit to action. If you tell them, they will resist the action. So you're kind of wasting your good thoughts by trying to fix her problem.
Yeah, forcing instead of empowering. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
It's true.
Marcia, do you have a favorite quote from your book?
Yes. Remember this. They want you to be present more than they need you to be perfect.
That's excellent. We're going to rewrite, so many of our listeners are, either on a treadmill right now or in their car, and so they're not able to write some of this down. So we completely revamped our show notes page to make it this kind of stuff easy to find. So those of you that love that quote will be able to find that easily on the elpodcast.com show note page.
Great.
And so, and Marcia, this is one of my favorite questions, because I've learned about so many new books from authors that we've had on, and your book is obviously going to create a paradigm shift and impact people's lives. And so what we're asking from you is, what's a book that you've personally read that you absolutely love it and it's had a huge impact on your life that you could recommend to our audience?
When I first heard that question, the book that comes to mind is a classic book, actually. It's a very old book called I and Thou. And it's a guy named Martin Buber who actually translated the Bible into German. But he talks about that when we talk with people, we often make people into an it, I and it, or I and you, which causes a separation. And you are just a means to an end. You're a means to me achieving my goals. And that pushes people away. But when you talk to someone as if they are special and they are important, they are thou. And they sense that you really feel that you believe they are important and they are capable of achieving great things. It's amazing how they will rise up, to work with you and to see themselves as more and be more. So it's that energy you bring into the conversation, the I and thou, or even thou and thou, which is so important. So yes, there's books that I've read recently that, have impacted me in my work. I read a lot of neuroscientists. Daniel Kahneman, I think he writes great books, Thinking Fast and Slow. We have to slow down our thinking. But I and Thou has probably been the most significant book for me.
Perfect. We haven't had that one recommended yet. So, Marcia, before we depart, can you recommend the best way for our listeners to get more information on you and your book, The Discomfort Zone?
Sure. Well, my website is outsmartyourbrain.com, and there is on the tabs on top, there is the Discomfort Zone. If you click on that, not only is there a description of the book, but there's also a lot of resources. And there's an assessment where you can rate how well you deal with discomfort, and it'll give you tips, and that's for free. So you can take the assessment, you can sign up for the blog where I share new ideas all the time. There's training tools, all kinds of resources as well. The books are available on all the online stores and hopefully in real stores too. But outsmartyourbrain.com and then Discomfort Zone book, you'll find a lot of things that will help you.
Perfect. Well, Marcia, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your, sometimes we call it your baby because you have to put so much time and effort into it,
right.
But sharing your book, your baby with us.
Thank you. I really appreciate the time.
Thanks again for listening in today. If there's a book that you would love to hear me cover, or you'd love to hear us bring on the author, please, you can hit us up straight on Twitter under the EL podcast, or you can actually do it to my personal handle, which is at Wade D. Danielson. I would love to hear from you, love to hear on what you think of the show, and also who you would like to hear on next. And as always, if you would like to get your hands on the Discomfort Zone or any of the other resources mentioned by Marcia, just look at the show notes at the elpodcast.com.
Looking for your next book idea?
Head over to the elpodcast.com,
where Wade shares his amazing resource, the top 10 business books recommended by over 500 entrepreneurs, with you for free.
That's the elpodcast.com.
Till the next time, keep it on the EL.